or whatever want to know, they assume that you have something in your mind, that you can see it or hear it before it actually comes out. There is actually one composer that I know of. I didn't know him personally, Naresh Sohal. He was a friend of America's. That he in fact could write an entire piece in his head, and all he had to do was then write it down, and he would send the manuscript to the publisher and didn't even need to keep a copy. But that is a very, I think, a very, very unusual way of thinking. Whereas I think it's more with words. There's a lovely passage in a novel by A.S. Byatt, and the young man is trying to. It's the novel called Possession. I don't know whether it's and there's a passage towards the end where the man, he's been wanting to write and he just can't. It doesn't seem to happen, and then something triggers it off, and he talks about suddenly words came from a well within him, and then he started to write. He didn't know, quite how this happened. Is it a bit like E.M. Forster said in a letter to somebody who indeed asked him, how do you write, and is it all in your mind first? And he said, how do I know what I think? Till I see what I say. Yes. And in fact, the French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who I like very much, he said almost exactly the same thing, and I can't remember whether they were alive at the same time, did one read the other or not. He said, "Mes paroles me surprennent." Yeah. What I say, my utterances, take me by surprise and teach me what I think. I didn't know that was that. Well, all right then.
And Robert Frost, who said a lot of very interesting things about poetry, said, "No surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader." This communicates, doesn't it? If we've surprised ourselves, that will communicate.
That will, yes.
And it's quite hard to surprise yourself because.
Well, I love what David Hockney said, which is when asked about the wide range of styles and everything with his work, he said, "Well, I don't mind boring other people, but I'm not going to bore myself." So it's along those lines. You do need to be surprised, and unless you're doing the kind of work, which is predictable. In which case,
we were going. My wife and I were going for a walk today. I mean, this may be a bit of a digression, but we were going for a walk today on the beautiful coast path here above Aberystwyth, and we didn't really have a proper map, and we got a bit lost, and we actually the walk was hugely improved by getting lost because we ended up going through this beautiful woodland and then the sea kept appearing at odd places that it shouldn't be, and something about being willing to get. I mean, we weren't intentionally trying to get lost, but there in me were warring two things: slight panic, where am I? Will we get back in time for the talk? And this is interesting. This is it's a beautiful place, and something about that.
Will a poem come out of that, do you think?
I don't know. It might, but as a metaphor for. I was on a long walk once, a 5-week walk, and I was lost. And I texted a friend of mine and said, "I'm lost," and he texted back, quite helpfully, really. That's part of it, getting lost. And I think that's important too. That we lose our way, and if we don't lose our way a little bit, then we're being too safe and take risks and not quite know what's going to happen and where we are, and lose ourselves and see if something comes out of that. Does that resonate with you when you're painting?
Yes, it does, because so often the process you feel yourself going wrong. And it dwindling to less than something that it should be.
And it's very hard to go with that, isn't it?
Well, you've got to try and counteract it, which I do with a sense that I then have to vandalise what I'm doing.
Really?
Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, just by putting more paint over it, or sandpaper, or scrubbing it, or Oh yes, a friend of mine was an artist, a very good artist, was asked, is every painting you do successful? Oh, she said, if I'm very lucky, 1 out of 10. Well, I think that's pretty good. Well, I mean, if you look at possibly your manuscripts, or you look at a musician's manuscripts, how many crossings out and rethinkings are there? Very, very occasionally, something will just come, and that is quite felicitous, really. But it just doesn't happen very often.
Keats said, "If it does not come like leaves on a tree, it had better not come at all," which is incredibly hard to live up to, and actually, and I don't quite believe it, but yeah, maybe it did for him. I don't know.
Yes.
But I wanted to go back a bit to this thing of balance in a painting, and this intuitive thing of what am I putting? When is the composition right? When is it finished? And it's a sort of gut. It's kind of instinctive thing.
It's a gut thing, which afterwards you can look at it and say, oh well, yes, of course, I've got that right in the middle. So that's not really very interesting. It'd be much better. And then you think, well, one does know about the golden section and so on, about how much more satisfactory that is. So often the sort of working out of what went wrong comes afterwards. And probably, I mean, there's a wonderful story of Leonardo sitting when he was doing the Last Supper, and the monks who were slaving in the priory garden, saying, look, this chap's here, and all he does all day is to sit and look at what he's doing. And we're in the garden, and he's getting paid much more than us. And so the prior, this is in Vasari's Lives of the Artist, and the prior called him in and say, look, the chaps are grumbling because, you're just sitting around all day. And so, of course, he then gave him what for as to, how artists needed time to think and so on. And he took his revenge by taking the face of the prior for that of Judas in the Last Supper. So yes. Sorry, I don't know where that came from.
It's wonderful. We might get lost. And
Yes.
No, I was thinking, again, because I asked that question because I'm very interested in what makes a poem live. When is it alive? And it's partly about the poet has gone on a journey and been a little bit surprised, I think, and hasn't known what the outcome will be before they began. But I've also got a sense that if a poem is, a bit like a living organism, a living being, then it's going to have contradictions and tensions within it, I think. And like all of us, we are full of contradictions. I think we're not just one thing. And I think for a poem or a painting to be alive, it's probably got to have some sense. And I think that some sense of that, I'm thinking, for instance, of probably the best villanelle ever written by Elizabeth Bishop, called One Art, in which she's giving one message on the surface. I'm coping fine. This is all fine. And the poem is about loss, and the losses get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the superficial message of the poem is, I'm doing all right. I'm managing this, even though it's difficult. I'm coping, and the iambic rhythm carries that sense of okay, I'm coping with this, until suddenly it all breaks down in the last verse, and all the rhythms go haywire, and all the rules of the villanelle are broken, and the meter's broken. It's an extraordinary moment to use a very strict form and then break the rules at a critical moment. And then you see that all the time there was warring in that poem, there was a war going on between coping and not coping. And then suddenly not coping overcomes her, and she's absolutely full of grief and breakdown, and then she gets herself back in. It's a really extraordinary poem, which is completely alive.
Yes, reminds me a bit, the poet Ruth Purdell says, we turn to poetry in times of loss because it gives a shape to our pain.
That's a
So this was a shape that admitted that it was breaking down. But going on from what you said, I'm sure that in the very beginning, whatever it is, that one has to be affected by something. It can be something wonderful, beautiful that you love, but it could be something that makes you very angry or sad. But unless you have that feeling before you started, was it Guillaume de Machaut said that car qui de sentiment ne fait, unless you have true sentiment, real sentiment, son dit et son chant, his words and his singing will be counterfeit. He was a 14th century French, and so I think that's as relevant today as it ever was, that you have to be affected by something very much before you can even start, which was very much the case. Can I read singing lessons?
That's kind of you.
This is a poem that Matthew wrote. Just a minute. And it's called Singing Lessons. And this, I think, illustrates this, that your experience, or several experiences, gave rise to this. The more I tried to loosen my tongue, to root my breath to its spring in the pelvic ground, the more I seized up, distress at breath constricted, song sticking in my throat. At this knot I am, and all its disconnect. But today I woke at dawn, not into time and space, but to that blackbird's utter flute, its sputter of clicks, its spendthrift fling and swanny whistle plunge, and then a silence even lovelier. For now I heard it listening, intent to all the stillness it had made come rushing back from far-flung hills and fields. Like trusting, when you give yourself away entirely, life comes pouring back. That was a cracking poem, Matthew.
It's very, very kind of you, and you read it very beautifully. I'm very touched. Thank you.
Very beautiful. Yes.
Thank you.
But that answers what you said. You know, your experience of your singing, and I showed that poem to an Alexander teacher yesterday, and she said, yes, that is absolutely about, you know, that you were struggling with the breath and so on, yes. And then there was the blackbird, and I think everybody can probably identify with that. Perhaps never hear the blackbird in the same way again. Yes. So what else were we going to say? Do we know when it's finished? That was another of the questions you asked. And what did you say? Auden said what? It's never
Auden
finished.
said the poem is never finished, only abandoned. He might have a point. But I think, and then Yeats said a poem should end like the sound of a click of a lid of a box shutting. Nice and conclusive, and
well, that
so
would
they're
not be the same for some
two different kinds of poem altogether. Right?
Completely different. I mean, that yes.
And perhaps that brings us quite nicely to, although we need to come back to that question.
Go on.
To how do we leave space? Not only within the poem, within the painting, but for the viewer, for the reader, because the reader and the viewer will be drawn in if there's a little bit of work for them to do, a little bit of what's going on here. I'm not sure where I am, and there are. You were talked about tragedy and trauma being the fuel of poetry, and it's true that every time a terrible thing happens, there's inundations of, forgive me, not very good poetry.
Where the emotion is not in doubt, but perhaps is it the stepping back that hasn't, it hasn't been there. it hasn't gone through the mill of its medium, whatever that is, the words, the structure.
It's good that people write. It's not. Don't get me wrong. It's good that they write, but what it's is it for me? It's something to do with the no space is left for me to interrogate the poem. It's coming at me very full on, which and I'm rather English, and if you meet someone who just talks at you 19 to the dozen, you want to step back. How do we leave space?
By a sort of obliqueness, perhaps, isn't it? By not stating the obvious, because the obvious is boring, and is it a kind of stepping back?
We want to leave the viewer free.
But leave the viewer enough to do. But yes, but you're not thinking about the viewer when you're doing it. You're not doing it for you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for the thing itself's sake, aren't you? And others will. But
isn't there a kind of tact, whether it's a penny or poem, of there's no final certainty, and life's very complicated, and there's all sorts of possibilities, and to leave back to the questions of Rilke, leave the uncertainties, leave questions, and I think if you can do that, it draws people in and allows them to form their own view and their own idea.
Yes. Well, I suppose I can sometimes do that when that's why I'm often saying a poem to myself when I'm painting, because it gives another dimension. I mean, that one was One Foot in Eden. I always get. Is that Robert Frost? No, it's not. It's Edwin Muir. Edwin Muir. 1 foot in Eden, still I stand, and look across the other land. The world's great day is growing late, and still these fields that we have planted so long, with crops of love and hate. Time's handiwork by time is haunted, and nothing now can separate the corn and tares compactly grown. Well, when I was doing that, that was going through my head.
So that's very interesting.
And it takes you one step removed from the actual paint, and it also, should you be tempted to do the kind of perhaps very descriptive work that doesn't leave so much room for the viewer, reader, as you've talked about, it's pulling you back into a more mysterious area. And that is the same with just that little. I've started doing. I did work with the Eisteddfod in 1986, making work on the patterns of King Hanny's and Welsh prosody, of which there's a little one lying on the table there. And then this is just the lettering. With the patterns of rhyme and alliteration, but then other ones, that is the quotation, which is not immediately readable. On the top is a portion from the Lament for Llewellyn of 1282. Pony welwch hint ar gwynt ar glaw, and that particular bit, Pony welwch hael and hwyliau an hour. Do you not see the sun sailing the sky? So sometimes something like that, it takes you away from the obvious, and pulls you back, and therefore leaves more space for the viewer to do what you've just said with a poem. And of course that is almost the definition of poetry, isn't it? Is that as opposed, because of course it shares language completely with ordinary discourse and shopping lists and everything.
Yes. Well,
but what's happened?
Right, yes.
Michael Tippett said it was a sea change that came over language. Something that you don't quite know, and suddenly the wind has changed, and you're in a different area. Do you think that's a good description from a musician? A sea change.
But yes, something enliven in a poem something enlivens language, and wonderful poets like Gerard Manley Hopkins have an extraordinary ear. You know, they're doing something so revolutionary with it's like the where the language is still alive before it's got so
much influenced by Welsh poetry.
And he has such a wonderful ear. But I'm interested in this idea of, you know, ordinary discourse and shopping lists, and that can't be poetry. I'm not sure about that. You see, if you think of William Carlos Williams, who I do quite often think about, you know, he wrote a note to his wife, which if you just read it as prose would be, "This is just to say that I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox. Forgive me," and which you were probably keeping for breakfast. "Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold." Completely ordinary language. And if it was written in one line, it would be different from what he does with it, which is fill it with space and silence. What he does
that's a sort of visual thing.
It's partly visual, but it's auditory too. What he does is, I can't quite remember how he lineates it, but it's, "Forgive me, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox that you were probably keeping for breakfast." Silence. "Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold." It's different, isn't it different?
It is.
And it's ordinary language.
Yes,
it's shopping list or language, but it's just that what you do with it is different, and it's a million miles away from Hopkins, who's working with very heightened, beautiful language, very, very different. But you can do something with very simple means, it seems to me, something very, very interesting.
Can I quote a wonderful poem by Hopkins? It's called "On a Piece of Music," and he starts off, "Howls to one thing wrought, the members how they sit. Oh, what a tune the thought must be that fancied it." And so it goes on. So he was of the opinion then that there was a thought that was a tune before it was manifest, as it were. But yes, that's fantastic. Are we?
Well, it's 1:45, and we've got to end at 6. So just before we hand over and ask you for the question, shall we just finish this part of our discussion by returning to your question about when is it finished? When is it finished?
When it no longer gives you a stomachache. Well, you know where you look at it and you think, no, it's like it's a bit there, and it's like a bramble that keeps snagging at you. When you know when we go for a walk and there's something that, or it's a physical discomfort.
Yeah, interesting.
So
and it's sort of alleviated when the painting is finished. You feel.
And you think, oh, that's all right then, and it can be nothing more than wiping a dirty thumb across a bit of white that jumped out and announced itself too quickly in the context of the rest of the painting, which I suppose you could do with it when you keep looking at that word. You know, the sort of the few translations that I've made, and there's just one that it doesn't do. And then you think, no, in the end, I'd have to change that one over there because I can't keep potching with that because I'll just make it worse. So if you change something over there, then that bit isn't quite so bad. So I think that's the kind of thing that we have in common. And as you change the bit over there, so some slightly different meaning comes in, and then you think, yes, sound and sense have parity now. They're together.
Lovely.
So that's as far as I can.
Yeah. Perhaps we should ask if there are questions.
Yes, we've only got 10 minutes or so, but have we answered your concerns?
We could go on all day, couldn't we?
Well, we already have. Does anybody like to ask anything. If not, we'll just carry on.
Can I just say thank you?
Yes, well, all the arts share certain things, and then you'll find that shares this and that, but it doesn't share that. No. It's it's a sisterhood, but not very closely related in every respect. Yes. Yes, in fact, I spent some time talking to a musician when I first was doing the relationship between painting and music as opposed to poetry, and she was a then president or whatever of the Jacques Dalcroze Society, and she in fact had done quite a lot of work with visualizing the well, I'm sure you'll know about Jacques Dalcroze. With the shapes of movement, within terms of the musical, and the spatial that brought in the physical spatial as opposed to the virtual space in music. Yes. Well, of course, there is a time flow in a painting, in a sense that it's taking you time to look at it, and you may see it again, or in a different light, or it's like you read a book, a novel that you first read 30 years ago, and you're bringing to it something entirely different when you read it again.
This thing about time is very interesting. How the arts in general, but I'm aware of it only more in poetry, but how something happens with time in a poem. You can slow time down, or make it go quicker. That's a very interesting whole other dimension we could think about. And you're saying it's actually similar in
well,
painting.
there's a journey around a painting, isn't it? That's going to take you time. And the artist has to think, where you're going to pause. Where is our dear friend Roger Young, who used to come and look at my paintings. He said, well, if that's your cherry on the cake, don't have lots of other cherries around it. If that's
leaving space.
Leave space so that not all the cherries are clambering together. Which seems a pretty good one, really. I think that the painter Ivan Hitchens said, "My paintings are meant to be listened to." So that's talking about time, isn't it? You don't just look at it. You're bringing in your other senses as well. Well, that's where it came from anyway. Yes. I mean, most recently, I suppose, because I know her, I've been looking at, or there we are, listening to the work of Erica Fox. Because I do know her quite well, and we've talked a lot about the comparative, creative process, and one particular painting that I can think of. I mean, it's only one example in her work, which is really influenced by European tonality rather than Western. It's very percussive. And it contains a lot of violent contrasts, and so I was working on a piece which took those aspects as a as a particular stimulus. But sometimes I'll just have Radio 3 on and see what comes, and something quite unexpected, and it'll turn out to be Debussy or whatever, and that will come rather in the same way as a piece of poem, a piece of poetry coming through your mind. It just comes as an added level, which will inspire it or direct it in a way that you really can't explain or understand. Or I hope that's what they wanted to know. Thank you, whoever asked that.
You were saying very interestingly that you have poems in your mind when you're painting, and I was interested to see, to observe or recognise that actually this idea of ekphrasis, which means poems inspired by paintings, the traffic is very much that way. It's paintings inspiring poems, and there seemed to me very little traffic going the other way of poems inspiring paintings. And you seem to actually use poetry quite a lot.
It seems to just come. Yes.
But so that's an interest. It seems anyway that there are more poems inspired by paintings than the other way around. But that painting. That poem, Musée des Beaux-Arts by Auden, about the Icarus, Peter Bruegel Icarus painting. And then there's the William Carlos Williams poem. It is very similar, though much simpler. There's a question for me about this. It's a very fine poem, the Auden poem, and it certainly takes the painting and finds something very true in it. That the fact that all that we see of Icarus are his legs sticking up out of the water because he's plunged down into the ocean, and every one of the paintings seems to be ignoring this fact. The ploughman is carrying on ploughing, the boat's carrying on sailing, and Auden's poem is all about how when something either tragic or momentous happens, everyone else is looking the other way, or not aware of it, or not taking it on board somehow. And Icarus's legs are very much not centre stage; they're off to the side of the painting. And so he writes this very fine poem, making this sort of kind of interpretation, kind of almost explanation of what's going on here. And my feeling is, hang on a minute, is he slightly narrowing our experience of the painting so that when we look at the painting, that's all we'll see? I mean, this is...
You would have liked something a bit more open-ended at the end. Leave it with what the Welsh would call a sort of toddide at the end, where you say, just a minute, there's
a bit
that.
contentious.
Here you are, over to you.
I think what I'm saying is a bit contentious, so that's all right to end on that. But, for instance, I think there's something else going on which Auden doesn't pick up on, and that's all right. He wrote a very beautiful poem, and they stand alone each, and they do complement each other, but I think it would be a shame if that poem meant that we only saw the painting one way. For instance, the ploughman has a very vivid red shirt, which makes the green sea even greener. And that's, that gets lost. Well, he doesn't have to describe the painting, but that gets lost. And then, why is the sun in the painting sinking on the horizon, or is it rising? But it's low on the horizon. And, it didn't take Icarus 8 hours to fall.
No, but he put it like that because the composition was better, and he'd forgotten.
I'm being too rational then.
Well, yes. If that's the right place for the sun, well, damn it, you put it there then.
But Icarus flew too high to the sun, and the sun was up. It should have been burning hot when he. I don't know. I'm probably being too literal. All I'm saying is, it's interpreted. And I'd like to go back to the artwork and just see it in a less sort of...
Well, you must write a poem then, Matthew.
It's all I'm saying is one way of looking at it, a very good way of looking at the painting, but it's not the only way. And then maybe we lose what is distinctive about paintings, the beauty of colour and the beauty of shape and movement, and that doesn't find its way into the poem because it's become a poem of an idea, a bit, for me.
Well, because
millions of people disagree with me, but there we are.
Well, there's always limitations when you go to the other art form because you've lost the things that your medium can't do.
But it's quite nice to end with that thought that there are things that the other medium cannot do.
Absolutely.
So we need each other.
Yes, we do. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, I'm sure you'll agree we've had a wonderful time. We were talking about slowing and changing the pace of time. That hour has flown by. So thank you very much, both to Matthew and to Elizabeth. for a fascinating conversation that we've been privy to this evening. You've taken us on a journey. I'm glad that you found yourself out of the woods and managed to arrive here. And you've taken us actually on a journey ourselves through those wonderful borderlands between sort of poetry and painting. So can you just show your appreciation, please, to Matthew and Elizabeth?
Thank you.
So,
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
So as we finish, can I just thank you as well for your attendance, both here in the Drome and online. It's wonderful to have you with us. Please keep an eye out for the other event that we'll have coming in the programme. There'll be an event soon on the Peacemakers exhibition, which will be opening soon on the left as you exit. So keep an eye out for that. And all that remains me to say is have a wonderful evening and come back again soon. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Have a good evening.
Thank you.